Hello, everyone.
Hello, Professor.
All right. Can you guys see the screen? Notes for chapter 4?
Yes,
Yes,
Professor.
Professor.
Okay, good. I was having trouble. And today internet is not stable, right? It's just like, disconnecting me, like, in my other two classes, it created a lot of problems. I got disconnected multiple times. Okay. So if we get disconnected, join back again. Okay. Don't go away. I will try to log in, and if I can't log in through my Wi-Fi, I will log in through my phone internet. But it's, I don't know. I heard that there's a strike going on, or like they are some issues with the internet industry, so something might have happened, and I don't know, or it might be my router. I have no idea, but it is disrupting. All right, don't go away, and join back again. All right. Today we are going to talk about own wage elasticity of labor demand, and then we will talk about um, basically how an individual would optimally allocate labor between work and home production. So we basically what it means is, like, we work, we have a fixed 24 hours per each day, and how much of those hours we will work in the labor market, how much of those hours we will spend at home, right, to produce home goods, right, for our consumption, or take rest, right. We are going to just divide between two alternative use of time, and then how people individual decide how many hours to work based on the current wage rate, and also in the individual's utility. That we will cover in the next chapter. But, like, we are going to finish chapter 4. Is very simple, it's a very small chapter, so we will finish this and we will move on to chapter 6. Okay. And our second exam is going to be at the end of this month, right? Or first week of November, depending on how much we can cover. All right. And then we will have, if we have it on the first week of November, then maybe third week of November, and then like, first week of December. So these are our 4 exams, and then we will have final one in, will be in the finals week. Okay. But there's no final exam, but we will just have our 5th exam in the finals week. And if you don't want the 5th exam, you might have, like, if you are happy with how so far, like, after after the 4th exam, if you're happy with your performance, and you don't want an exam, we can have a substitute paper. Okay. So we will talk about it as time goes on. And in terms of the makeup class, I will make it up next weekend, because to this weekend I have to, like, the degree plan thing, I have scheduled hours from tomorrow 2 to 5, but I don't think it will be enough. There might be issues, and Anika extended the, like, the degree planning week for the weekend also. So I want to leave that free, and I have a meeting, and I have to write a report. So basically this weekend is gone. I will make the class up next weekend, one of either Friday or Saturday. So we will talk about it, like, once it's settled. Okay. um I hope you guys are doing okay. I know it's a lot of information, and I'm sorry about last, like, Sunday, because I became very sick. I couldn't even get up from bed. Something, I have to go and see a doctor, but, like, going to the hospital is so scary. I did a COVID test and I went to ICDDRB. It was very scary. So I just don't feel like going to the doctor, but I should go and see one. I'm not very well physically. Something is wrong. But it's just, I don't want to go
Professor,
for.
you can consult online.
No, they will ask me to do. My problem is my blood pressure, right? My blood pressure is very high, and my diabetes is also, I think, is not under control. um and also there might be some other issues, maybe thyroid or something, because I'm gaining a lot of weight, right, over a small period of time. It's maybe because I'm stuck at home. I don't know, like, lots of issues going on, and they will ask me to do a lot of tests, right? And I don't want to go right now. If I go for this, and I'll bring something back home, I just don't want it. And it's not for me so much I'm worried. My dad is very elderly. He's like, 81. So I don't want to kind of like, if I bring it home, he will get infected because my daughter kind of like, she will be the carrier, right? Even if I isolate myself. So that's the issue. Anyways, we'll figure something out. I don't know how long this COVID thing is going to last. You already heard, right? Our spring semester is going to be online. And I'm not so sure about summer either. God knows what is happening. But some of you guys will be there.
Professor, we are not getting the graduation ceremony.
You will get a graduation ceremony. So this December, what is happening, the last batch, we are having an online graduation ceremony in December for the last batch. So maybe you will get something like this. But you know what, I think like, when eventually there will be a vaccine and when we open, um, you guys should write like, to the administration to have a big convocation so that all the batches that are missing out on the physical ceremony can take part. They can all come to campus and have a celebration because this is a once in a lifetime thing and it's something that will stick with you, right? My undergraduate,
Yes, Professor.
it's very special. I got my degree from Amartya Sen. So it's something like, and you guys will have like, very big names, right? Nobel laureates and statesperson. So it's a remarkable experience online, but not everything can be done online, right? So let's see, like inshallah, if things like, if we can tackle this pandemic when it opens, you guys should write to the administration to have a big celebration. It would be fun. You guys can come back and then I don't know where I'll be, but I hope I can be there. Anyways, so let's get back to business, okay? Today we will talk about own wage elasticity of labor. And then there are Hicks-Marshall laws that basically explain how these own wage elasticity will be affected for various things, right? So basically the determinants of own wage elasticity. Let me say someone is writing something on the chat. You guys don't have, I don't understand, who is this person? All right, so there is no midterm, there is no final. We just have 5 exams. Each of these exams have 20% assigned to them, right? 20% of your grade. And this is it. We don't have any final. If you want a midterm, if you want a final, it's fine. I can write a midterm and you can, because, but I don't know why. Do you guys not listen to me, or like, you don't, never even read the syllabus, or like, you're not present in the first class? I don't know. And each exam we are having, I don't know what this exam, this question, when is our midterm, professor, when is our final? I'm like, what is happening? There is no midterm, there is no final, we just have 5 exams. I think it's more than enough. Like, 5 exams is a lot. I think I'm testing you enough.
Yes, Professor.
Every chapter, and it's a like, the first one was easy. Don't think that that's the, because the chapters were easy, right? Things will get difficult as we go along, so it's going to be a lot. If you want, I can have more exams, but I don't think
No, Professor, no.
No,
it's not.
Professor. Don't.
No, Professor. We are fine with the 5 exams.
Okay, so we'll see. If people like it, we can have exams. We'll see that, but not now. Okay, let's just stick to whatever we have now. Okay, own wage elasticity of labor demand. So you can see that we know the formula for elasticity, and it's the same percentage change in employment in labor market I per percentage change in wage in labor market I. Okay, so the I subscript is very important. So this is talking about a particular market. So if the wage for teachers go up, university teachers go up, how does the employment of teachers actually change in percentage time? So this is own wage. So the wage of the same employment group. So if the wage of the carpenters increases, how does the percentage change in employment occurs in carpenter market, right, or plumbing market. So basically it would be in the same profession or same category of labor. Let me see, someone else has written something else. When is our where were you? I just said it would be the first week of November. Jannat Alisha, I didn't want to speak out your name. You have to pay attention, right? Where were you? I just said it will be in the last week, like, last week of this month or first week of November. And then the third one will be like, third week of November. And the fourth one will be first week of December. And the final one will be in the finals week, provided that you guys don't want to substitute with the substitute the fifth exam with the paper. That's what we decided, right? Like, but so far, like, this is where it stands. We are having 5 exams. You guys are so paranoid about exams. I don't know. Like, so is this clear? It's unbelievable. All right. So percentage change in employment. So the demand, who is demanding labor? The farms are demanding labor, right? How are they responding, right? When the particular wage rate in a particular profession increases, right? And how many of them are, like, how the demand for farms are changing with respect to increase in wage rate. Okay. And very similarly, right, if this, obviously the relationship is negative. If the wage rate increases, the farms actually are going to not hire as many workers. When the wage rate is low, they are going to. It's okay. I know I have so, like, don't like take it on Alisha. She has an internet problem, so that's why she missed out all these points. I completely agree. I sympathize with you. I have like today I am having such a big issue with internet. So yes, I don't know how you guys manage. Like, how many classes do you have each day? At least 2, right? And I
Yes,
don't know how you manage
Yes,
to sit
Professor.
through all these classes and then go to and watch the videos, and it's just too much time online, right? It's just crazy. I don't know how you manage. Maybe your age, right? I can't stay on the look at the screen for that long. My eyes hurt. So, like, I don't envy you for this, at least. But what can you do? The world is like this, and if we have to do something, so unfortunately, well, it is what it is, right? Like, as Trump said. All right. So if own wage elasticity, which is represented by eta, this n sign is in Greek, it's called eta. It's a Greek word, right? Alpha, beta, this is eta. I is percentage change in employment in labor market I divided by percentage change in wage in labor market I. All right. If this eta in absolute value is greater than 1, then own wage elasticity of labor demand is elastic. Hamida, what is 2 or 3?
Professor, I mean that we have every day 2 or 3 classes.
We have aggregate what?
We have every day we have 2 or 3 classes.
I don't understand. We had 2 or 3 classes. Me?
She want to say that every day she have 2 or 3 classes.
Oh,
You
every
talk
day you
how
have
many
2 or 3 classes. Oh, yeah. Oh, I understand. Yes, some of you have classes on Thursday also, right? Oh my God, I can't imagine. It's just crazy. Yeah, it's unfortunate. What can you do? Like, this is not optimal. I sympathize.
Also, the internet connection, Professor, I already dropped one course.
Yeah, I understand. But the problem is, if you can't finish your courses on time, they will ask you to pay. But I guess not this year. It's okay, Dema. We didn't cover much, so just pay attention from now, okay? All right. So let's get back. you know what elasticity is. Elasticity is how it measures responsiveness, right? So how will the firm respond in terms of demanding workers when the wage rate rises? That's basically the definition of elasticity, and you know how to calculate percentage changes. So this is basically just an extension from principles. And of course, the wage rate and employment are inversely related. This is a demand curve. We are talking about the labor demand curve. So they are inversely related. So the sign is negative, right? The sign of eta II, own wage elasticity, is negative. If the absolute value is greater than 1, we will say that own wage elasticity of labor demand is elastic. If it's less than 1, we will say it's, why isn't it letting me change it? What is happening? It's crazy. Okay. All right. And if it's equal to 1, we will say that it's unit elastic. Okay. Now, we already know that there's a relationship between elasticity and slope. To understand this, right, you remember we talked about this in principles too. When your starting value is small, right, the percentage increase is very big. And when your starting value is very big, the percentage change is very small. So let's see, an increase from 1 to 2 is 100% increase. An increase from 100 to 101 is only 1% increase. But the label change is 1. It's always increase from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 100 to 101, 10 to 11. But look at the percentage changes. Percentage changes are very, drastically changing. So if the initial value, if your start value is very small, your percentage change is going to be very big. And if your initial value or the base value is very big, your percentage change is going to be small. Can someone tell me why?
Yes, Professor.
Yeah, tell me.
For example, if we take the first example, then suppose that the initial number was 1 and the change number is 2. So 2 minus 1 divided by 1 multiplied by 100 is 100% increase. And in the second one, 3 minus 2 divided by 2 multiplied by 100 is 50% increase. And in case of 3, 4 minus 3 divided by 3, that is 1 by 3 multiplied by 100 is 33% increase.
Yes.
And in case of,
so very good, Lutfun. So what she is trying to say, because the initial value is something that we are using to divide, it's in the denominator. So if the initial value is very big, the denominator becomes very big, right? So as a result, the elasticity, the percentage change becomes smaller. When your initial value is smaller, you're dividing by a smaller number. So if you divide by a smaller number, the percentage change is going to be very big. If you divide by a bigger number, the percentage change is going to be small. Okay, so that's why when your initial value is 100, you can see that your percentage change is very small. When your initial value is 1 or 2, you can see that the percentage change is very big. Okay, so this is basically pure math, nothing intuitive about this. But this helps us understand why even in a straight line labor demand curve, right, where the slope is the same, at every point in a linear demand curve, but the elasticity is different. Because at the upper part of the labor demand curve, Q values are small, not Q, the labor demand values. So E values, employment, E values are smaller, but the W values are very big. So when W is very big, right, what is the percentage change? It's going to be very small. When Q, the employment or labor demand is very small, the percentage change is going to be very big. And cross wage elasticity is percentage change in employment divided by percentage change in wage. So when you divide a big number by a small number, you will have elasticity greater than 1. Okay, because percentage change in labor demand is going to be very big because the labor demand number is, the employment number is small. The wage number is, they give you a look at this wage rate is much higher. So since the wage rate is high, so the percentage change in wage is going to be small. So you divide a higher percentage of employment divided by a smaller percentage in wage, leading to an elastic demand. Okay. In similar reasoning, since the wage number over here at the lower part of the demand curve, the wage numbers are small, so the percentage change is big. But the employment number is very big, so the percentage change is small. So a small percentage in employment divided by a big percentage in wage rate, so the denominator is very big, right? So that demand is inelastic. Okay, so along a straight line demand curve, right, we can see that the upper part of the demand curve is going to be elastic and the lower part of the demand curve is going to be elastic. And exactly at the midpoint, right, exactly at the midpoint, what happens? It divides this axis and this axis into half. So in this situation, right, the percentage cancels each other because it's dividing, it's a triangle, right? So it's going to divide this axis and this axis into half. So it's the percentage change are going to cancel each other. Okay, so it's going to be exactly equal to 1. So at the midpoint of the demand curve, elasticity of demand is going to be 1. Okay, so this is basically like the same thing that we did in principles, right? So we know that upper part of the demand curve is inelastic, the lower part is inelastic, and exactly at the midpoint it's going to be unit elastic. The other thing to take away from this is the slope of the demand curve. The steeper the demand curve, right, the inelastic the demand curve is. The flatter the demand curve, the greater would be the elasticity, because when the demand curve is flatter, for a small change in wage rate, the response in labor demand employment is going to be very big. When the demand curve is very steep, right, then the same change in wage rate is going to cause a very small change in employment because the curve is very steep. So when the demand curve is steep, right, demand is inelastic. When the demand curve is flat, demand is elastic. Okay, so this is again something that we already know. So this is something that's important, and this is we have never read before. So which is the Hicks-Marshall laws of derived demand. Hicks is a famous economics. I'm sure you have done Hicks decomposition in intermediate micro. And Marshall, you already know that he invented marginal utility, right? He is the proponent of marginal concept. So both of them together basically identify the determinants of own wage elasticity of labor demand. And they are, the higher the wage rate, right? No, where did it go? The price elasticity of demand for final product is relatively high. So if the price elasticity of demand for the final product, so we are talking about the output. If the output is very elastic, right, in that case, the labor that is used to produce this output, the cross wage, the own wage elasticity of that labor is going to be very high. So it's going to be very elastic. So own wage elasticity of labor demand is going to be very high if the product demand is very high. Okay, and if there are many substitutes for this particular kind of labor, okay, if there are many substitute is available, so like let's say if it's unskilled workers, like you can substitute with capital, obviously you can substitute with many other kinds of labor, right? But if it's a very skilled particular type of worker, then it's very difficult to substitute. So let's say a computer technician, it's a very particular skill. You cannot ask anyone to do his job because they don't have the skills. But our maintenance people, right, I can even work as a maintenance person, you can work as a maintenance person. It doesn't require any particular skill set. You just know how, like basic hygiene, you know how to clean things, right? It's manual labor. So those things is very easy to substitute. Okay, and if it's easy to substitute, if a labor is very easy to substitute, their cross wage elasticity is going to be very high. Okay, the supply of other factors of production are relatively elastic. So the other factors of production are basically the things that we are going to substitute with, right? This particular kind of labor. If their supply is very elastic, then the cross wage elasticity of labor demand is going to be higher. And this category of labor accounts for a relatively large share of total cost. Okay, so let's go through one by one. The first one is saying that if the price elasticity of the final product. So let's say we are talking about shoes, right? A particular brand of shoes. So let's say, like, I don't know what is your favorite shoes. So I know one, Jimmy Choo, like, because of the movies, right? I've never seen one, and I know they're very expensive. One pair of shoes is $1,000 or $2,000 or even higher, right? Very expensive shoes. I don't even like to wear a shoe of that high price. I don't think my foot has the, like, the credentials to match such expensive shoes. So I don't know, I've never seen one, but I heard that they are very expensive. Okay, so if those product is highly elastic, so what does that mean? That means if price drops for Jimmy Choo brand of shoes, people are going to significantly increase their demand. Their people are very responsive. And similarly, if price increases a little bit for Jimmy Choo shoes, people are going to cut the demand by, like, significant margin. That means it's very elastic. The shoe is very elastic. Now the workers who are working in this factory, right, who is working in this shoe company, their own wage elasticity will be higher if the shoes is very price elastic. How? Okay, if the wage rate of these workers increases, right? So these workers are working in this shoe factory, and their wage rate increases by a little bit. Okay, this increase will lead to higher average and marginal cost of production of the shoes. And this higher cost of production will be reflected in higher price of equilibrium price of the shoes, because if the cost increases, the firm is going to raise the price of the shoes to make up for the cost, right? So since the price of shoes increases, people are, if it's very elastic, then people are going to drastically, like, cut down purchase of these shoes. So the farm will not be able to sell the shoes, right? So they will reduce production of shoes. Okay, so if they reduce production of shoes, what will happen? The farm doesn't need as many workers, right? So they will fire a lot of workers. So wage rate increased of the workers, and it was reflected in the price of the product. Since the product was very elastic, people are going to significantly cut consumption. As a result, there will be a huge scale effect, right? So the farm is going to reduce production significantly, and as a result, lay off a lot of worker. Okay, so you can imagine, the more responsiveness the people show towards this particular product, the greater will be the impact on the employment of labor. Okay, so the price elasticity of the final product has a significant role in the magnitude of the own wage elasticity of labor demand. Okay, clear? Okay. The second law is talking about if this particular kind of labor whose wage rate has increased is very easy to substitute. As I said, like, let's say, like, the maintenance people, right, who are working. So if the wage rate of the maintenance workers increases, then the farm will obviously try to switch, because it's expensive to hire them, so they will try to find substitutes for them. So they will, instead of asking, like, like 10 people to clean our campus, they will probably buy, like, vacuum cleaners or professional, like, other more machines, and invest in machines and fire all these workers, right? So if it's easy to substitute some workers with other like, you know, other factors of production or other kinds of labor, the farm will do it. Okay, but sometimes it's not easy to substitute depending on the profession. Like, so like, you know, it's not going to be very easy to substitute, like, you know, professors, because they come with a particular skill set, right? If you want to replace, like, you know, your philosophy professors with an economist, that's not going to happen. We need another, because economists would not be able to teach you philosophy. Okay, so it's not possible. So in that case, like, you know, the own wage elasticity is going to be inelastic. But if it's easy to substitute this labor, in that situation, own wage elasticity is going to be very high. It's going to be elastic. Okay. The third one is saying that own wage elasticity of labor demand will be high when supply of other factors of production is relatively elastic. So this is interesting. So let's say there are two factors of production, labor and capital, and the wage rate of this particular labor has increased. So as a result, what will the farm do? The farm will substitute this labor with capital, right? So what is happening? The demand for capital will shift to the right. Look at the first graph. So the demand for capital will shift to the right, right? The supply of capital is, like, you know, relatively flatter. So what happens? With higher demand of capital, look, the demand for capital goes from K1 to K2, right? But look at the price. The price did not increase much. So the farm can easily substitute labor with capital with not much expense, right? Because we can see that the price of capital did not rise much, even with significant employment of capital. But if the supply of capital was very, like, you know, inelastic, right? What would happen? The same shift in the demand curve for capital, because the farm is switching from labor to capital, you can see that this increase in demand for capital is driving the price for capital up significantly. So what is going to happen? If the farm wants to substitute this expensive labor with capital, the capital price is also increasing as a result. Because it's inelastic, it's also increasing. As a result, the farm's cost is also increasing. So the farm will not be able to substitute labor with capital. If the supply of capital is very elastic, right, in that case the farm can actually easily substitute labor with capital, because capital price does not increase much when the more capital is being demanded by the farm. Okay, so if the wage rate of the workers increases, the farm will substitute capital for labor, right? So they will fire workers and hire more capital. But in that process, if the supply of capital is inelastic, the price of capital will skyrocket. As a result, it might not be profitable for the farm to substitute capital for labor, right? So that is a problem. But if the supply of capital is elastic, then farm can easily substitute this capital. It can employ a lot of capital without, like, you know, incurring a lot of expense, because we can see that the price of capital is not rising. So it will significantly substitute the labor whose price has, the wage rate has increased, with capital if the supply of capital is relatively more elastic. Okay, so this is the third one. And the fourth one is talking about when this particular labor whose wage rate is rising, the labor cost is a significant share of production cost, overall total cost of production. Okay, so if, let's say, like, you know, you're running a clinic, okay, and you are talking about, like, you know, your head of medicine, right, the professor, the famous professor, his salary is 75% of your cost. Okay, so if 1% increase in his salary will make your cost go up by 75%. Okay, so you're going to be very responsive to this wage rate increase. But the cleaning, the nurses and their salary is like, a very small percentage of your total cost, right? So if their salary increased by, let's say they are the cost of the nurses and the maintenance people, it's only 10% of the total cost of your clinic. So if their salaries increase by 1%, same as the doctor, your total cost is only increasing by 10%. So you are not going to be as affected. But if the salary of your surgeon increases by 1%, you are significantly affected because your cost increases by 75%. So you are going to be very responsive, right? You will try to fire that worker, fire that surgeon, and maybe hire 2 junior surgeons or something, right? Your response is going to be much more prominent or more elastic when the labor cost is a significant share of your total cost. Okay, so that's what you see in AUW. The university lays off permanent full-time faculty and hire adjuncts, because adjuncts are cheaper and full-time professors are expensive. So if the professors, if there's a salary increase, or if there's a critical situation, you'll see that not just AUW, any university in the world will lay off their full-time professors and make do with adjunct professors, and which we are going to do soon. We are losing 2 PPE professors and we are going to substitute them with adjuncts. Okay, so this is basically what the fourth Hicks Marshall law is talking about. Okay, clear? Any question? No? Good. So now we move on to the next chapter. All right. Okay, can you guys see the screen? This one?
Yes.
Okay, so this chapter we are going to talk about the supply side, people who are supplying labor, that is us, and what are the determinants of labor supply, how a worker decides how much time to spend in the labor market. That means each day there are 24 hours, how many hours he will work and how many hours he will sleep. And we are going to just use 2 uses of labor hours. So labor and leisure. Leisure accounts for your sleeping, your recreation, and everything else, right? Everything is bundled into leisure, like home production, everything. And labor is the number of hours you work in the labor market. So the 2 alternative uses of time. And this chapter is going to talk about how the worker optimally allocates between these 2 alternative uses of time. Okay, so this is the determinants of labor supply. All right, so before going into this, we're just going to talk a little bit about the trends that we have observed in the one last 50 years or so, right? What has happened in the labor market across the globe. This is, even though this is mostly true for the US market, but since the world is more globalized right now, it's applicable to our countries as well, with some little caveats, because our labor markets is very unique, right? It's not the same as the classical neoclassical labor market that the textbooks are written on, because there's no perfect competition, right? You know that already. Okay, so the trends is, for male labor force participation, it has decreased significantly since World War II. The reason is, right, schooling has increased, like formal schooling. um, People are staying in school longer. Before, after 18, most people were not going to universities, so they would start their labor market, whatever occupation, they would start their employment decision early in their lives. But now they are postponing till late because people get undergraduate degree, then they do a master's, then they go for like an MBA or some associate diplomas or PhDs and all that. So as a result, since they're delaying entry into the labor market, right, you see that labor force participation has declined, right? Because you know that the definition is if you're actively working or seeking for employment. When you are a student, you are not part of the labor force. So by definition, labor force of males have declined because they are staying more in school. And the other reason is because of earlier retirement. Okay, traditionally men are employed in the financial sector, right? When you see that most of the men are like either in the finances, like the stock market and all those, and or in the tech business. Okay, so they make a lot of money and they're retiring early. Okay, because they can afford to do so. So basically, there is overall in the whole world we see a declining trend in male labor force participation. Contrast to that, female labor force participation has significantly increased in the past century. The reason is when men went out in the to the war, right? When fighting, women had to come out. Before that, women were mostly homemakers. They were not in the formal labor market. But when men went out to war, they have to support the family. So women started working, mostly in secretarial job, right? Office administrator and secretarial job. But they started working. Okay. And the other thing is, many other changes happened in the world. Okay, there is the invention of birth control pill in 1965. That changed basically because women got control over their own body, right? They can decide whether when to have a child and when not to have a child, so they could decide on that. In the past it was not like in their hands. So when that became available, they could space their children or have a more informed decision, like when to have a kid, so they could space their labor market activity according to that, right? So, and because of the pill, the fertility rate went down significantly. People were having less children. If you look at your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation, each of your grandparents had like 10 siblings. Your parents may have like 4 or 5 siblings, and look at you guys, you might have like maybe 1 or 2 siblings at most, right? So fertility rate has significantly declined over the years. So women had more time on their hands because they don't have to care for many small children, every one child every year. That trend has gone. So that means they had more time and they could participate in the labor market. And with the boom in economic growth, right, especially like the all the economies started growing significantly from the later part of 1990s till now, right? All the economies are having significant growth. As a result, there is a rise in real wage rate. So when the real wage rate rises, the opportunity cost of women's time in household, right, it increases. Each hour she spends at home cooking, she's giving up 1 hour worth of salary that she could have earned if she worked in the labor market. So it's forcing her to choose like formal employment because she doesn't want to give up so much salary by staying at home, right? So the opportunity cost of her time has increased. At the same time, like all the countries in the world, women are 50% of the labor force. So if they don't participate in the labor market, their country is going to not prosper. So with this view in mind, right, even the developing countries started heavily investing in female education. So female education, like the educational attainment has increased. So once you attain education, you want to use it. Before, women were not as much educated, so they thought that okay, I'll just cook and clean and raise my kids. That's basically all I will do in my life. But as soon as they started like getting more and more education, they wanted to use their education in productive employment, so they started working more. Okay, divorce rates actually increased a lot. So in the past, only single women who did not marry, right, or the women who were divorced were working. Married women never worked, right? They were, the husband was the bread earner and the women were the homemaker. But what happened is because of increase in divorce rates, right, the labor force participation of women actually increased. And also, like, there was a kind of like a social structure where, if you look at your grandparents generation or even your parents generation, there's a social norm that, okay, women should take care of the children, she should, like, she should be a homemaker, right? But now it has changed, like, it's basically looked down upon that you earn an education and you don't, like, actively look for a job, or you just sit at home, so your education has gone to waste. Only you can teach your children, that is some reward, but that's an indirect return to your education, not a direct return to your education. So basically the societal norm has changed. It's now the parents actually, like, invest more in female education, because they see that daughters actually take care of the parents even more than the sons. So the norm has changed and parents are investing in daughters' education. As a result, basically, female labor force participation is rising. And the other reason is diminishing returns. Okay. Men have been working in the labor market in general. So what do we know? If you keep on using the same worker, more and more worker in the same space, right, there will be diminishing returns, right? Any factor of production, if you keep on using more and more of it, there will be diminishing return. So male labor force, like, is basically because they are working to their optimal level. Okay. But females were not working. So if you think about a country, right, when female workers, the return to female education, if the country invests in female education, the return is going to be significantly higher than the return on male education, because they are already working there to their optimal. Now if you ask them to work even more, the return is not going to be as high. All right. Now females, like, since traditionally they were not working, when they start working, the return to their education is going to be significantly higher. So the government of all these developing countries also have incentive to invest in the female labor force, because that they will actually get a higher return on the investment that the government makes, right? So there will be higher GDP growth rate if females are participating in the labor market. Okay, because of all these reasons, we see that there's a steady increase in labor force participation from females. So this is the good side, right? We all want that. But the bad side is, you will see that there is a kind of a segregation. Female labor force is increasing mostly in non-STEM subject areas, right? Even though if you look at the US data, when the college graduates, so every year, right, if you look at the number of women, the percentage of women graduating in sciences, the STEM subjects, right, science, technology, engineering and math. So if you look at that, like, the graduation rates, the number of percentage of females graduating in STEM is higher than men. But after 10 years, if you look at the number of women employed in this sector, in the STEM sector, is significantly, like almost, like, 1/3 of that of males. Okay. So this is a problem, and this is because of the biological clock. Okay. So, STEM is very competitive, and it changes because the technology changes every day. So to keep up to date with the technology, you have to invest in your education, you have to keep up to date, so you have to invest continuously, keep on investing. But for a female, like, she has to work, then come home and take care of the kids, and, like, and then find time to invest in education is very difficult. But for a man, it's much easier. So that's why you see that even if women start their career in this sector, they kind of drop out after a period, because when they have, before they have kids, right, they basically neck to neck with men. But once they reach the age of like 30 to 35, you'll see that significantly, like, they drop out. So as a result, what happens? You don't see women in these area in higher level positions. So there are a lot of entry level positions like women occupy, but they don't, because they drop out, we don't see many women in the top positions of this particular sector. But like in non-STEM we see a lot of women in top positions, but in STEM areas we don't see as much. So that is one significant problem. Okay, so of our biological clock. To tackle this problem, many countries have taken many policies, like so the like maternity leave, not only the mother gets it, the father gets it also, and women can like have a paid leave and they can come. And then childcare is, in Europe childcare is free, right? But not in US. So you can drop off your like 2-month old baby, or like or from like 3 months. I think they have 6 months, so maybe 6 months onwards you can drop off your kid and go to work, right, for free. So that means like it's, she doesn't have to bear the cost of raising the child, right? So that is a significant change. So you will see there's a, if you look at the labor market composition in Europe versus in US, there's a significant difference, okay, because of the social policies. So that's where the importance of policies are, like to increase the uh, like we talk about gender equity in labor market, parity and all that, but some of it has to come from the policies, right? And you have to understand why, like what you observe in data, what is the root cause of this result, right? That is important. So now like you can think and analyze and basically see which factor is contributing more to the current status of female labor force participation. Okay, so that's
Uh,
basic. Yes.
I have a question, concern regarding this.
Okay, go
Uh,
ahead.
Okay, Professor. Professor, I found in social media that's right now the economics that we are talking about, it's feminist economics. That is what I found, because this is talking about basically the labor force
No.
participation of female and encouraging. And there are some writers who are writing books against why it is not wise to take women in the labor force, because that the men are not getting, that is the male are not getting the facilities in the job market, because women are taking part in that sector, while women has a responsibility to take the care of her children and home. But instead of that, women are doing those things, which is the reason why male are not getting job. And the economics that is being run is basically a kind of conspiration which is being conducted by the multinational companies, who wants like that is right now we can see that the bike company, uh, it was for a male earlier, now they have all the male consumers and now they want more profit. That's why they are promoting that the women should drive as well, women should have the equality like men. If man can drive, women can also drive, like the cigarette
No,
company as
no,
well.
no,
I
no, no,
don't know,
no,
I don't know,
no,
I have
no.
just
This
found those things, and
no,
in
no.
the
This is
books also they are motivating people like
no, no.
that.
This is propaganda. Look, let me tell you one thing. Okay, the farms, whatever company, they are profit motivated. Okay, so they will not promote a particular type of labor. Let's say male is one type of labor, female is another type of labor. They will not promote a particular type of labor unless it's profitable for them, because if they go by all social cause and all that, their profit is going to suffer. They are very competitive. Whichever labor, whichever type of labor gives them the highest return, they will hire it, right? So they are not going to kind of like um, think about like they will only think about their profit. So like I don't like buy that. If the men basically these companies, the tech companies, are employing more women compared to men, because women don't bargain as much. Okay, so there is a statistical discrimination in the labor market against women, so that women do the same job with a lower wage rate. So it's profitable for the farms to hire women for the same position, right? It's just universally true, right? Professor Moinul and I, like we with the same, like we joined in the same year. I graduated, I did my PhD 3 years before him. but we joined AUW in the same year. And like, you know, so basically in terms of completing my degree, and I also had taught in US. So, but because in Bangladesh, the norm is when you finish your undergraduate, the public universities actually employ so as soon as you finish your undergraduate, they are hired as lecturer. But in any other part of the world, that is not, like, you know, a bachelor's degree holder cannot teach, like, you know, a bachelor's degree student, like, you know, formally. So that's not, but then in Bangladesh, this is counted as experience. So that is a problem, and the university discriminated in terms of, because he has more experience, he started teaching, and I directly went for my PhD. He waited, he taught here for a while, and then he went. So his experience counts, and I didn't have, like, I have some experience but not as much as him, and he's senior to me by 6 or 7 years. So basically they discriminated against me. This is the thing, like, you know, remember, the farm is profit motivated. They will only hire people who are going to give them more profit. There is no social cause or anything. The
No,
social
in
cause,
terms of attracting the consumer side, farms
no,
always.
the consumer side, the social, what you're saying, the social aspect of it. Yeah, I'm affirmative action, I have affirmative action, I have 50% of my workers are female and all that. This is a propaganda thing that they sell to the consumers, but they only hire women because they are more efficient, right? They will not hire someone, a female, who is not going to deliver the job. They hire women who will deliver the job and who are paid less. So it's a win-win situation for the farms. Do you understand? So they make it a, like, you know, advertising issue. At the same time, they get their job done at a lower cost. So they make their profit share bigger. Okay, and part of it is also imposed by the government, because the government, so as I said, why the governments are heavily investing in female labor force. So the certain government regulations are also there. The government can demand that the farms would have like 25% of their, at least minimum 25% of their employees have to be female, something like this. Many countries have these policies that in your company at least there has to be some parity. If not, like, you know, 50-50, there has to be at least minimum 25% has to be female. So you will see that, like, you know, in any job description there is written at the very end that females are encouraged to apply, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that if the female is not qualified, the employer will hire her because of the regulation. No, they are profit motivated, they will not do it. Okay, so don't read into these propaganda things. They are not, like, you know, think logically. You are an econ student, so you know that anything that happens, there is a reason behind it. Okay, so think in that, like, you know, in that process. Anyway, so
Professor, yeah. Just last concern. Yeah. I know I'm bothering you a lot, but the thing is that, Professor, this kind of propaganda is massively, spreading like really wildfire, because this kind of religious books are being, published in the book fair, and these are being written by doctor, not an economist, which is why people are also
yeah,
uploading this in their stories and Facebook.
no, this
So,
religious group and this very orthodox and very, like, you know, they will all, and remember, like, you know, there are many views. There are feminist economists there, you know, they just only harp on the discrimination part. But remember, part of the discrimination is because of lower skill level. Female are in generally, like, because they started their education journey much later than men. So obviously, if you look at the aggregate scenario, females on an average have less education than men. So if the men are earning more than females, it's because their education level is lower. The discrimination only happens if for the same level of education and for the same qualification, if women are paid less, right? So there is a difference, right? The mainstream economics will talk about, like, you know, both sides. It will talk about the discrimination part, but it will talk about, like, you know, the difference because of skill set difference. But the feminist economists would only focus on the discrimination part, and they will not basically acknowledge that there is a skill difference. So there are the premise sometimes is not the same. Okay. And like, don't, I don't know, don't read up on these religious, like, things. Honestly speaking, my mother is she's very religious, right? And then she is, in her Facebook page, she is a member of many groups. And yesterday, this one lady, I know I'm diverting Lilith, but this is important. So one lady said, like, music is haram, right? And that just, like, threw me off. She's such an, but she is the head of this, like, she's the admin of this group. And they publish a lot of, like, quotes, and, like, good things are also there. But this thing threw me off, because, like, I'm not a cleric, I have, like, very limited knowledge. But when I was little, I heard that, like, many stories that many, like, people who are not believers, who heard, like, recitation of the Quran, because the voice and the tone of the person who was reciting was so captivating that they converted, right? And then this muazzin, who was Bilal, like, whose voice was so beautiful and soothing, and whose call for prayers actually was so beautiful, that, like, even though he was like, an African, right? So Habshi, like, he was promoted as, like, muazzin by the Prophet. So basically saying, like, to have a beautiful voice, to have, like, music and rhythm, right? It's actually promoted in Islam. I don't think it was, like, it was negated in any way. But what I think was, Islam was trying to do, if women were made to dance and sing for the entertainment of men, which was very common back then, right? Women were treated as some sort of pleasure object. That was, I think, was like, objected against. But not music. If someone is forced to perform, if someone is forced to make to dance and sing for the entertainment of men, that is haram. Of course, I protest that. That is wrong. Any sort of subjugation is wrong. But, like, this lady was proclaiming that the whole, like, this literature, art, music, everything is haram. That is completely wrong. Quran itself is a huge verse, right? It's written in poetry, in a poetry style, because so that people can memorize. You cannot memorize prose, you can memorize poetry, right? Because the rhythm, right? So it is written in a rhythmic way, so that people can memorize. So her logic is completely wrong. Even me, without being a cleric, I thought that there was something seriously wrong, but I don't have the knowledge to kind of, like, go and talk about it. So whenever you see these things, think logically and choose for yourself. Don't just, like, you see many famous, and then sometimes they sound very logical too. So, but don't fall into their traps, right? Religion is very important for everyone, right? It's a sacred thing, but your religion is your own, right? Organized religion is never good. Never good. Okay. Religion is to give you own peace of mind, and it's very private thing, and your own religion is your private thing, right? And organized religion can never do any good for the society. It can only harm, because organized religions fight against each other. Individual religion never fights against each other. Okay. Anyway, that's a lot of, like, unnecessary things that has nothing to do with, but logic is very important. So follow the logical trend. Okay. All right. Let's go back to economics. Okay. Opportunity cost and optimal allocation of time. So this is what we are interested in. Okay. Opportunity cost is, like, each hour of time spent at home, right, is basically has a high opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is the wage payment that she can earn for that particular hour of work if she worked in the labor market. So opportunity cost of home production, 1 hour of leisure, is the wage that she is giving up, wage rate that she is giving up. Okay. The substitution and income effect of wage rate. When the wage rate rises, two things happen, right? So especially on the labor supply decision of the individual, when the wage rate rises, obviously I think that, okay, if I work more now, I can earn more money. Okay. So basically, the people who are already in the labor market, they will supply more hours, because they want to get the benefit of this higher increased wage rate, right? So they will supply more they will keep on working overtimes and more hours. And the people who are not in the labor force, they say, oh my God, wage rate has increased, so I am actually, my opportunity cost of time has gone up, so they will start looking for work. Okay, so that means people who are not in the labor market, they will try to look for work, and the people who are in the labor market, who are already working, will increase their labor supply, right? And so basically, because of these two things, whenever there's a wage rate, right, you see that people labor supply is increasing, so they will substitute their home or leisure hours and for labor hours, right? So there will be a substitution effect, so people will substitute leisure with labor, because wage rate is high, opportunity cost is high. And there is an income effect. So when wage rate increases, people are earning more. Okay, when you earn more, what happens? When your income increases, you consume more of the normal good, right? When your income increases, you buy more, and if the goods in question are normal good, you will buy more. Only inferior good you will buy less, right? But leisure is a normal good. So when your wage rate increases, you actually want to consume more leisure. So what happens when wage rate increases? Substitution effect says increase work hours. Income effect says decrease work hours, because you want to consume more more leisure at home. So for these two phenomena, we can see that labor supply curve can be backward bending. Okay, when wage rate increases in the y-axis, we can see that when substitution effect dominates income effect, that means when my opportunity cost of labor, I think it's like, it's higher, I should increase my labor supply. We see that there is a upward sloping part of the labor supply curve, because each hour of labor is giving me a higher wage rate. I'm substituting my leisure with labor. Okay, but when you have crossed a significant threshold of wage rate, that means you have such high wage rate already. Now if the wage rate still rises, right, you want to enjoy your higher income, so you are going to buy more leisure hours and reduce your work hours. So we see that the labor supply curve bends backward. This is the only supply curve that has a downward sloping part. Okay, remember, supply curve is always upward sloping. Only in case of labor supply, we see a backward bending labor supply curve after a significant threshold of wage rate has been crossed, where income effect will dominate substitution effect. Okay, all right. Now our next thing that we are going to talk about is the indifference curves and the budget constraint. So in this segment, we are just going to focus on the main crux of this chapter, is how an individual will divide their the 24 hours of time, right, which is a constant given by God. You cannot change, you cannot increase your daytime more than 24 hours, or you cannot cut your day short by 22 hours or less, right? So it is always 24 hours. That's the constraint that is given. How are you going to distribute between these hours between labor and leisure, right, optimally, so that you have the highest level of satisfaction, you're as happy as possible working and balancing your home life and work life? Okay, so for this, we need the indifference curve approach, because the individual is going to optimize, right, and choose a combination of labor and leisure so that he is as happy as possible. Okay, so I'm sure all of you have gone through the ordeal of dealing with indifference curves. Indifference curves is basically a curve that joins all the points that are indifferent to each other. In this situation, we are going to say that the individual is going to choose between leisure, which they are going to consume, and also real income. Real income is basically the composite commodity. With income, because you're not saving anything, we are not going to allow saving, right, or borrowing or any such thing. Whatever your income is, you're going to buy consumption items with it. So your real income is your consumption, and the other commodity is your leisure. So the individual is choosing between consumption and leisure, and choosing between these two to maximize utility or happiness. Okay, so an indifference curve in this Y and L plane. Y is the composite commodity or income and real income, and L is the leisure. So this leisure and income is basically determining the utility or happiness of the individual. An indifference curve is saying that along this curve, any combination of real income and leisure is giving the individual same level of happiness. Okay, so any combination of Y and L is giving the individual same level of happiness U0. Okay, now if you look at this curve, like this combination of Y and L, so here significant of consumption, a little bit of leisure. So this guy is working really hard, has a higher income, so he is driving a Ferrari but sleeping less. Okay, and this person is like enjoying a lot of home time, has a lower consumption, so he drives a Honda or a Toyota Corolla, but enjoys like a lot of home time. These combination, both these combination, even though they have different amount of leisure and consumption, but they are giving the same level of happiness or satisfaction to the individual. So A and B are indifferent and they are on the same indifference curve. C is a point, right? Is basically that has higher level of leisure and higher level of consumption. So C cannot be as this giving the individual same level of satisfaction or happiness. C has to be on a higher indifference curve. So what it means that C will be in a higher indifference curve. This is very important. So if the higher the indifference curve, the happier you are. Okay, because why? Because like the more is good. So in this new classical labor model, the more you have, the happier you are. So if you are on a higher indifference curve, it means that you are better off. Okay, and the two constraints we have is called, like two of them are is called time constraint and goods constraint. Okay, time constraint is H plus L equal to T, where H is basically hours of work, L is leisure, which is equal to T is the total time you have. So T, let's think of T as like 24 hours or 365 days, or it's a fixed allocated time. It's a constraint that is given. Your time is given. You cannot change. The total time is given. Now, H and L are the variables that you decide how many hours you want to work, right? H is hours of work, and L is leisure. How many hours of rest or sleep you want to have? Okay, so the time constraint is saying that my hours of work and my leisure would have to be equal to my total allocated time. All right. And then the market wage rate is given by W, and we said real income. So the price index is given by P, and Y is the real income. And what we are saying here is the second is the goods constraint. Remember, Y is the composite commodity or real income. That means we are going to consume all of our income. So if the individual is working 8 hours, he will be paid like W wage rate. So total income would be W into H, and he is going to spend all of his income on the consumption. So P is the price of the composite commodity and Y is the amount of the composite commodity. So the total expenditure is going to be P into Y, which has to be equal to your income. That means the goods constraint is saying that you are spending all of your income on consumption. Okay, so these are two of your constraints. So let's go back. The two constraint is H plus L equal to T and PY is equal to WH. Any questions so far? No? Good. So now what we are going to do is look at this H. We are going to substitute this H into equation 2. So we have PY, if you substitute this, it equals T minus L. So instead of H, you are going to substitute T minus L. So it will be PY is equal to WT minus WL. Okay. Or alternatively, you can write is WT equal to PY plus WL, right? So little just like algebraic manipulation, you have this. So what does this equation 3 tell you? Equation 3 is the full income constraint. Okay, what it means is that you have 24 hours. If you have worked these 24 hours at wage rate W, that would be your total potential income, full income that you can earn if you worked all of the 24 hours, right? And on the right hand side you have out of that full income you're spending part of it in your consumption. The remainder is you're spending on your leisure, because leisure has an opportunity cost. Each hour of time you spend at home, right, you're giving up the wage rate. So what are you giving up by spending L hours of leisure time is W into L. So this is the value of your leisure, and PY is the value of your expenditure of your composite commodity, and WL is the expenditure on leisure. So the two expenditure side equals your full income constraint. Okay, so your total income or full income is divided into consumption expenditure and leisure expenditure. Okay, and if you look at equation 3, we can manipulate this even further. Take PY to this side, right? Keep PY and take WL to the other side. So WT minus WL, and then divide by P. So you will have Y is equal to W by P times L minus plus WP by T. All right, so this is very easily done. Just divide by P, take this to the other side, take WL to the other side and divide by P. So you will have equation 3. So if you look at equation 3, this is basically my budget constraint. Look, if this is my full income constraint, we are manipulating the full income constraint and we are writing it in terms of the relation between Y and L. Okay, look at W and P. W is a constant that is coming from the market, right? It's a parameter. P is the price index, it's a constant. T is also a constant. So this part is the vertical intercept, it's a constant number. W by P is the slope. So W by P is the real wage rate. W is the wage rate, P is the price index. So W by P is the real wage rate and L is the number of leisure hours. Okay, so W by P is the slope, and this W by P and T is the vertical intercept. So this is my budget constraint. Okay, this is telling you for each hour of leisure I enjoy, how much consumption can I have? Or for each hour of for each amount of consumption, how much leisure can I afford? Given that I face a wage rate W, a price index P, and the full income, the full time constraint T. Okay, so this is my budget constraint. So to plot the budget constraint, we have to plot the two variables in question. One is leisure. My main choice variable is leisure. We place leisure going from 0 to L, and the maximum time we have is T. So this is my limit. So 0 to T in this direction, right? Rightward is measured leisure, and hours of work is measured from 0 to T on the opposite direction, right? So if you are somewhere in the middle somewhere, so that will say, okay, how much work have you done? From you have to measure work from starting from this T position towards the left, and how much leisure you have consumed, you have to start from 0 towards the right. Okay, and together H and L equal to T. All right, and now we are going to plot the budget constraint. We see that WT by P is basically the vertical intercept, and the slope is minus W by P. The slope is minus W by P. The vertical intercept is WP by T. And we have on the y-axis, we have consumption, and in the x-axis, we have leisure and hours, because they are related, right? So when you have one of them, if you have leisure, you can easily calculate H because T is a constant. And if you have H, you can easily calculate L because T is a constant. Okay. So we have our budget constraint, we have our indifference curve. If we bring them together, we can find the optimal allocation between H and L. Okay. So when we bring the indifference curve and the budget constraint together, we see that the optimal allocation between consumption and L occurs at this particular point where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget constraint. What does that mean? Why is not U0? Because it is still crossing, like, the budget constraint. U prime, double prime is not possible because it's a higher indifference curve, and given my budget constraint, I cannot reach U double prime. I would have been happy if I were in this higher indifference curve, but I cannot reach it. Given my budget, I have to stay between U0 and U prime. The problem with U0 is that, like, U0 is giving me an allocation between labor and consumption that is suboptimal. I can actually do a better trade-off between my consumption and leisure. At this tangency point, it's not possible to go beyond this, like, this point, because this is the highest possible indifference curve I can reach. Remember, the higher indifference curve, the better off you are, the happier you are. U0 is a lower indifference curve, so I can do better, and this U prime is the best I can do. Given my budget constraint, this is the highest possible indifference I can reach because it's tangent to my budget constraint. Anything else will be higher, I cannot reach it. Anything else will be lower because I can do better. Okay. So basically this is my equilibrium, and this equilibrium says the individual will choose this amount, Y star amount of consumption, and will choose L star amount of leisure. As a result, he will choose, like, T minus H amount of work. Okay. So this is basically how the individual chooses between optimal, leisure, and consumption. Now, what is the, like, this the condition of the equilibrium? What is happening at the equilibrium? We can see that the slope of the budget line is exactly equal to the slope of the indifference curve. What is the slope of the budget line? Minus W by P. Okay. What is the slope of the indifference curve? Can someone tell me what is the slope of the indifference curve? What are on these axes? Is delta Y by delta L, right? What is delta Y by delta L? How the consumer is substituting,
Change in which way can change in
how the consumer is substituting between consumption and leisure. The trade-off the individual is, like, doing, right, to remain on the same indifference curve. So A and B are indifference point. So the individual is willing to give up this amount of consumption to gain this amount of leisure and stay indifferent, right? So this is the slope of the indifference curve at point A, which is the tangency point at point A, which is telling you that the individual is happy to sacrifice this amount of consumption to gain this amount of leisure, right? So it's a trade-off between consumption and leisure. That's the slope of the indifference curve. So we are going to call it marginal rate of substitution. And if you do this, I'm going to leave it to you because I think we have done it in many other classes, and also I'm sure you have done it in your intermediate micro, that the slope of the indifference curve is a ratio of the marginal utilities. Okay, so I leave it to you. Think about how you can, like, make the slope of delta Y by delta L equal to the marginal utilities of consumption divided by marginal utility of leisure. Okay, so this is your home task. Think about how you can, like, come up to that the slope of the indifference curve is the ratio of the marginal utilities, and then we will write the equilibrium condition. Okay, any other question? We are going to end here, basically stop here, and then we'll continue Sunday. I think it's like we already too much we did in one day. Any question? No? All right. So with this, I'm giving you this task to figure out how you can write the slope of the indifference curve equal to, this is not, it doesn't have to be leisure consumption. You have done it for many, it can be between two commodities, right? So you have done it, but it's the slope of the indifference curve is the marginal rate of substitution, and it's equal to the marginal utilities of the two commodities. So I leave it to you to figure it out. It's very easy, but I leave it to you to figure it out. Okay, and then we will take it up from there next Sunday. All right.
Professor,
Yes.
can I talk to you about the degree plan?
Degree plan tomorrow. I'm exhausted. I've been teaching, like constantly talking from 3. So I won't give you time right now. Tomorrow I gave time from 2 to 5. So you can call me in my WhatsApp number. Okay?
Okay, Professor.
I'm really
Thank you.
sorry. Like I'm exhausted. I've been talking 5 hours at a stretch continuously. Okay. So I'm sorry I can't give you time right now. Call me tomorrow, 2 to 5. All right. Any other question?
Professor, thank you.
All right.
No, Professor.
All right. I'll see you Sunday then. Take care. Have a good night. Goodbye.
Good night, Professor.
Bye-bye.